everybody. So, who owns history? Today, I'm going to be discussing why I believe cultural artifacts should be returned to their place of origin. And to begin, I would like everybody to imagine a scenario in which you have a family heirloom that's been treasured and passed down for generations, such as a piece of jewelry or artwork. And somebody had taken it away decades ago to display it in a museum thousands of miles away that you can visit if you have the means to, but you can never truly bring it back home. Because this is the reality that many communities are facing. And today I'm going to be arguing why I think museums should return these culturally significant artifacts, as many of them were taken through unethical means. And by returning them, I think we will be helping to promote fairness and reconciliation. So, why does this matter? To understand the issue, we need to understand the history behind it. Many museum collections were built during periods of colonialization and war. Countries with more power often removed these artifacts from the indigenous communities all around the world, and they were often sacred items like religious artifacts or symbols of a community's identity. And when these were taken, these communities lost pieces of their history and their culture. So the picture that I have displayed in this slide is a bust of Nefertiti. It's one of Egypt's most famous artifacts, and it was taken to Germany in 1912 under circumstances that Egypt is arguing was unethical, while Germany is standing their ground and saying it was obtained through legal matters. This is a great example of why this is an important subject to be speaking about now and what we think we need to do about it. So for this stance, I analyzed two speakers that are supporting the same position that I am using the human communication rubric. And the first speaker that I looked at was Chip Cowell. He's an anthropologist and a former museum curator. His main point in his speech was that museums are starting to recognize they have an ethical responsibility to return cultural treasures, as many were taken through colonialism, theft, or unfair circumstances. He goes on to explain that these artifacts are more than museum pieces, and that for many communities, they are sacred objects that represent their traditions and beliefs and cultural identity. He also argues that when these items are returned, it helps communities reconnect with their heritage and begins to repair relationships that have been damaged for generations. The second speaker that I analyzed was a filmmaker and artist, Jim Chuchu, and in his speech, he focused on African artifacts that were taken during European colonialization, and he explained that many of the objects tell the story of Africa's history and culture, but they are being displayed in museums very far away from their place of origin. He believes that returning the artifacts gives African communities the opportunity to reclaim their history, their cultural identity, and to teach future generations about their own heritage. I thought both of the speakers communicated their ideas very well. They were organized and easy to follow and used powerful historical examples and personal stories rather than relying on just facts. I thought this combination made it very engaging and, in my opinion, very persuasive. Additionally, both the speakers use storytelling to show returning cultural artifacts is much more than giving back old objects. Chip Cowell shares stories about indigenous communities receiving sacred ceremonial items after they had been kept in museums for decades. He also explained that these returns help communities reconnect with their traditions and beliefs that have been interrupted for generations. While Jim Chuchu discussed the lasting effects of colonialism in Africa, he explained that when these artifacts remain in Western museums, the communities are separated from important parts of their history, and he believes that by returning these objects would help restore the cultural identity. I felt like these stories made it clear that these artifacts are more than museum displays and that they represent the history and identity and traditions of real people. On the opposite side of this, analyzing the opposing speakers, I researched James Kuno and a panel that's called Open to Debate. These speakers believe that museums should continue to house many of these artifacts because they see themselves as caretakers of world history. James Kuno argued that artifacts belong to all humanity and not just one nation. He believes in universal museums that allow the world to learn about many cultures in one place. While the Open to Debate panel discussed through many speakers that many museums have the financial resources and conservation expertise to preserve these fragile artifacts, and they worry that by returning them, they would not only limit public access to these artifacts, but put these artifacts at a greater risk as they might not be properly cared for. When I analyzed these discussions by these opposing speakers, although I thought that they were both knowledgeable and supported their arguments with evidence, their presentations focused a lot more on logic than it did on emotion. James Kuno discussed history, museum ethics, and cultural preservation from an academic perspective, while the Open to Debate panel relied heavily on legal ownership, preservation standards, and educational benefits. Although I felt like these were important points, compared to Chip Cowell and Jim Choo Choo, they shared fewer personal stories that displayed the direct personal connections that these decisions would have on people directly involved. I found it personally harder to connect with their message, even though that these arguments were still well supported. To support my stance, I found some academic articles. One by Neil Brody studies the illegal trafficking of cultural objects. He explained in his article that many museum collections grew because artifacts were removed through colonial expansion, looting, or illegal antiquity markets. And his research showed that museums have a responsibility to carefully examine how objects were acquired, while Patty Gerstenblith focused on museum ethics and cultural property law. She argued that museums should balance preservation with respect for the cultural communities connected to the artifacts. Rather than just viewing the artifacts as valuable objects, she emphasized recognizing their cultural and historical importance to the people that they came from. I think that these sources strengthen the argument that returning artifacts is not simply about ownership, but that it's about correcting historical injustices while still preserving history. So, why should we return them anyway? I understand the concerns about returning the artifacts. Museums play an important role in preserving history and educating visitors. However, preserving an artifact doesn't mean that the museum has to own it forever. Today, museums can work together with countries through long-term loans, traveling exhibits, or partnerships. This would allow everyone to continue learning while also respecting the rights of the communities these artifacts belong to. In this slide, I have a picture of the scale because I believe that we need to find balance. In this slide, there is a picture of the Rosetta Stone. This is an important artifact as well that was discovered by Napoleon's engineers in 1799 during his occupation of Egypt and then was later confiscated by the British. This stone is being housed in the British Museum, and Egypt has repeatedly called for its return as they view it as a symbol of colonial plunder. In conclusion, I believe that cultural artifacts are much more than objects being displayed in museums. They represent history and identity, traditions, and beliefs that continue to matter to today. Returning these artifacts acknowledges past injustices, respects cultural heritage, and helps build stronger relationships between museums and the communities that they serve. I would like to leave everybody with one final question. If something represented your family's history and identity, would you want it displayed in a museum thousands of miles away, or would you want it displayed where it came from. These are my references slides, and I hope you enjoyed.